order. We are one short of 51%. We are 6 of 12, and Dr. Fessinger is on his way. He may be delayed a little bit, and as I've mentioned, we have texted him and see when he'll get here. There are two action items that we need his presence for. Of course, the review of the minutes and then the consideration of the funding recommendations to the full coordinating board at the end. I'm Roland Gertz. I'm chair of the advisory committee. What I'd like to do to start out with, as we typically do, is introduce ourselves, and I'll start with the committee members themselves.
I'm Sally Davis. I'm from San Antonio.
I'm from San Antonio, and I'm a retired federal employee.
Dr. Bruce Becker, family practice at Medical Center Hospital in Odessa, Texas.
Tim Benton, I'm residency program director at Texas Tech in Odessa, in Permian Basin.
Elizabeth Mayer, coordinating board staff.
Suzanne Pickens, coordinating board staff.
Claire Hawkins, TAFP, residency director's delegate.
Damon Trans, vice chair, family medicine, UNTHSC TCOM, and I'm representing TOMA.
Connie Berry with DSHS Primary Care Office. I'm not a member of the advisory committee, just here for expertise, I guess.
And I'm Lisa Mahler. I'm with the coordinating board also.
Thank you all. And as is our tradition, would the audience please introduce themselves?
And hey, Roland, Lou Foxall on the phone here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to come back to you, Lou. I didn't know if anybody else had joined us or not, but Lou Foxall in the air.
I'm Cindy Passport, and
Thank you all for being here, and Dr. Foxall is on the phone, and at some point in time we will come into the electronic age, and the State Council will understand that electronic meetings are viable options, but for now we can't. So what I'd like to do is make a couple of preamble comments, and I was hoping we'd have a lot more work to do after this session. But as it turns out, we had a little bit of an improvement, and the other things that are related to helping, particularly family medicine and primary care, are going to be directed a slightly different way that you'll hear about in just a few minutes. The other thing, I have a sad note to mention to you. Elizabeth Mayer, who has supported us for a number of years, is moving on. She is leaving the coordinating board, and I want to tell her very much from my perspective, thank you for your support and help. I wish you well in your new endeavor, and I'll let her say a few words to us before I introduce who will take her place.
So I'm actually moving to the UT system. I wanted to just thank everyone here. I've been here for 5 years, and I've learned so much about GME in general, and I think family practice will always have a special place for me just because of all the people, all the program directors I've had an opportunity to meet. Jonathan Nelson and Tom Banning and TAFP and the Faculty Development Center. I just am very appreciative from everything that you all have taught me, and look forward to hopefully working with all of you in the future in my new capacity. So I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Gertz. I also did want to let you know this meeting is being webcast, so we are online, and so our discussions mainly for the program directors so they can see what's going on. This is typically the most important meeting of the year because we discuss the funding options.
To say that a different way is be on your kindest manners and comments, since it will be indelibleized. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Suzanne Pickens, who will help us in the future. And Suzanne, you want to say a few words?
Well, hello, and I'm really happy to be joining this group. I'm looking forward to it a lot, and I do look forward to working with you all. And I'm going to apologize in advance for not knowing enough and ask your indulgence in helping me learn as quickly as I can. I have been working with graduate medical education over the past couple of years with the Emergency and Trauma Care Education Partnership Program. And so I've learned a lot in those 2 years of one small area of GME, but I look forward to working with it a lot more and learning a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome to the group. And I think what I'll do right now is I'll pass over the review of the summary notes. Claire, have you heard back from me? Okay. And what we'll do is go to Lisa Moeller, and thank you for joining us again to give us an update on the educational loan repayment program for physicians. If you could go ahead and give your presentation, we will move through the agenda with the information items. And I know that many of the people that will view this or are listening to this will certainly be interested in the report of the legislative appropriations and the other options of grants that will be upcoming in the very near future. So, Lisa, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, before I talk about the current status of the program, I thought it would be a good idea to give you a little refresher of what's happened over the past few years with the program. Before 2009, approximately $1 million per year was appropriated, and we're talking about since about 1985 when the program was first authorized. About 80% of that was dedicated medical school tuition set-aside funds, and the rest was general revenue, not dedicated. The program, for the most part, was fully subscribed over the 20-plus year history. Financial commitments were only for disbursements made during the biennium. There were no multi-year commitments, but physicians knew that we gave priority to renewal applications, and therefore, because the legislature continued to, the funding was very reliable, was not cut over that long period of time, many physicians exhausted their eligibility in the program. By 2009, the $9,000 annual loan repayment award was clearly outdated. It was not competitive with other similar programs around the country, that most of which were modeled after this program, by the way. So in 2009, the 81st regular session of the legislature, House Bill 2154 allowed for substantial expansion of the program, and that was made possible by the revenue stream created by changes to the tax code for smokeless tobacco. Before that time, smokeless tobacco was taxed on the basis of its retail value, whereas the changes to the code made it so that the tax was based on the weight of the product. And what that did was create this revenue because the generic products that had previously been taxed on the basis of their cost were then in line with the name brand products. And it's amazing to me that that one small change has generated roughly $30 to $34 million per year for this program alone, and that's not even all of the revenue. The rest of it went to the Property Tax Relief Fund, I believe. Don't quote me on that. So the bill provided for up to $160,000 per physician in student loan repayment over a period of 4 years. Now, that was, of course, for people who had that much student loan debt. The amounts would be prorated based on that for those who owed less than that. The fiscal note for the bill submitted by the LBB matched the estimates that the Coordinating Board and the Department of State Health Services put forward, and that was that the first year we only needed administrative funds, startup funds, to get the program going. And the second year, we estimated approximately $5.6 million was needed for the actual awards, loan repayment awards for the first cohort. Well, the legislature appropriated $22 million for the biennium. So we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Department of State Health Services, and their role was to enroll people in the program, do all the outreach activities, review the applications for eligibility, and ultimately would be sending the coordinating board a file containing the information we needed to verify loan balances and make the actual disbursements. Just as the program was gaining momentum, well, I should back up and say that DISH enrolled 103 people into the program in FY10, with their first disbursements to be made in FY11. And just as the program was gaining momentum, the budget picture for FY12-13 was becoming very clear by the spring. Virtually, all programs were cut, and the Department of State Health Services stopped enrolling new physicians by June of 2011. By that point, they had enrolled an additional 43 physicians. So the 82nd legislature appropriated $5.6 million for 2012-13, which is about 25% of the previous appropriation. Fortunately, our budget staff determined that due to the agreements we had entered into with the physicians, we could encumber unspent FY 2011 funds as long as they are spent by August 31st of 2013. So this, combined with the appropriation for 12-13, allowed us to honor all third-year commitments and some fourth-year commitments. Most of those people were in the program before September of 2009, for service periods ending by August 31st of this summer. Currently, we have 130 physicians in the program, and I'd like to fast forward to the 2014-15 legislative appropriation request. Our agency put forward a request for $33.8 million for the biennium, and that is based on a need for $4.3 million, which includes, this is for FY14, it includes $1.8 million for fourth-year awards and $2.5 million for disbursements to 100 new participants if service begins this summer. The amount needed for the entire four-year commitment for that first year is $16 million. And for 2015, the request was $29.5 million, and that's for disbursements to an additional 100 new participants and for the remaining awards for 4 years of service for both cohorts. So that's a total of 200 new physicians that is the basis for that request. Although I'd like to make a note that although we received communications from the LBB indicating that we had authority to encumber funds for the entire 4 years, even if some of the funds, are disbursed after August 31st of 2017, our budget experts don't find that authority and have raised this question with the LBB. It won't become an issue as long as the funds continue to be appropriated. But we do intend to make it very clear with every conditional approval letter that the coordinating board is making a commitment through such and such year, depending on when the service begins. As you all probably know, there was very strong support for this program during the session, and the appropriation matched our legislative appropriation request for a total of $33.8 million for the biennium. We knew we needed to spring to action as quickly as possible to enroll 100 new people into the program. So we posted the notice of the appropriation and an application on our webpage on Friday, May 24th, which was right before the Memorial Day weekend. And the first cohort application deadline is August 31st of this year. We mailed letters to TMA, Torch, TAFP, the Texas Hospital Association, the Texas Association of Community Health Centers, directors of Texas Primary Care Residency Programs. I hope all of you received that letter. As I said, the goal was 100 new participants this summer, but we probably will have room for even more people because there have been some people who have dropped out over the last year. We're very encouraged, though, because in such a short period of time, we've already received 40 applications, and we're in the process of reviewing them for eligibility. So that's really very encouraging. I'd also like to mention some other legislation affecting the PELRP. many of you probably were aware of Senate Bill 143 by Senator Nelson. One of the provisions in that bill created a path of eligibility in the program for people who are not practicing in health professional shortage areas, but who have met yet to be defined targets for the number of Medicaid and Texas Women's Health Program enrollees. The bill stalled at some point and ultimately found its way to House Bill 2550, which did pass. That provision says that applications will be considered only if funds are available after financial commitments for each fiscal year have been made to other program participants. So what this means is that we will have to wait until the end of the fiscal year to consider any applications. We're still working out the details of what sort of application process there will be, when we'll post the application, but it's likely that we would begin reviewing such applications probably in mid-June of next year. We are going to rely on the Health and Human Services Commission to establish the targets. The bill says that we must enter into a memorandum of understanding with that agency by October 1st. And my current draft of the proposed rule amendments for the October board meeting states that the MOU will establish the patient numbers that will qualify these physicians. We would probably want to eventually publish those in the actual rules. Additionally, the draft rule states that these applications will be considered on a year-to-year basis. That is, we will not be making multi-year financial commitments, as this is the only way we can ensure that the health professional shortage area physicians and up to 10 physicians at secure correctional facilities will receive priority before the new provision kicks in. Also, House Bill 2099 by Representative Guillen authorizes the Nursing Faculty Loan Repayment Assistance Program. And this provides loan repayment to nursing faculty for up to $7,000 per year. The bill states that in each state fiscal year, the board shall reallocate for this program any amount in the PELRP account that exceeds the amount necessary in that fiscal year for purposes of loan repayment assistance for nursing faculty. Therefore, nursing faculty will be in line for funds after any physicians allowed into the program as a result of House Bill 2550. It's very difficult to know if there will be funds, but again, this is something we're going to have to determine at the end of the fiscal year. Finally, House Bill, I thought you would be interested in knowing, House Bill 3663 by Representative Howard would have eliminated tuition set-asides for the PELRP, but it didn't advance very far, and therefore those set-asides are still being collected. And that concludes my update. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I also have some program fact sheets with me that do not incorporate any of the changes that I mentioned, but reflect the current status of the program.
Thank you, Lisa, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Fessinger. Thank you.
Sorry I'm late. I'll blame Houston traffic.
No problem. We're just glad you're here. Glad you're here. All right, the floor is open for questions from the committee members first for Lisa, and then we'll go to the audience. I have one while everybody thinks. Okay. Lisa, is there an option for input into your design of the qualifications for that section that you mentioned in you?
Of course.
Yes. When do you anticipate that will occur?
Well, I learned very late in the game that my internal deadline is Monday the 24th for the draft. It hasn't gone through the review process. I would be happy to share what I have with you, and you could distribute, but with the understanding that it hasn't gone through our internal review.
It'll be listed in the typical way for open public comment at some point.
Oh, yes.
All right. Any other questions? Lewis, any questions?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. No, it's great. I'm very pleased we have reestablished this program. It's critically important, I think, to recruitment and retention of physicians in these areas, and this is righting a wrong that's very important.
I would agree with you, Lewis. I don't see any more questions from committee members. Any questions from the audience? Yes. Please come forward.
Yeah, just.
Since we are recording, this is a reminder for those of you that showed up. We are webcasting and recording.
Is it on? Marcia Collins, Texas Medical Association. Actually, just a laudatory remark, and that is for the coordinating board and Lisa in particular for taking what I consider to be one of the most unbureaucratic approaches to implementing this by allowing us to have applications this summer and getting the word out now so that we can ensure that those applicants that are eligible are named by September 1 and ensured to get the full amounts of those money. So just our thanks to you for taking that special provision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia, for that comment. Yeah, there have been a couple of instances where the typical bureaucratic processes have been sort of clarified. There's another one coming up with a primary health care program, from what I understand, too. All right, if there are no questions from the committee or any more from the audience, then I will go back to the order of the agenda and have us consider the summary notes. Are there any corrections, addendums, revisions, suggestions to be made by the committee? We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Don't see any, there's really no debate on that type of motion. If there isn't any more discussion, Lewis, do you have a question? I heard something. No? All those in favor of the motion to approve the summary notes, please say aye. All right. Thank you. Any opposed? All right, good. All right, Elizabeth, now we get into some really interesting stuff, so keep your ears open. I think before this, what I'd like to say is there was a tremendous amount of work done by a whole bunch of different people, some in the room and some not, trying to reinstate funding for family medicine and also primary care across the board. I just, not to say this in any bragging position or not, but I probably made more trips to Austin during a session than I've ever made. And I know others. I know that Dr. Fessinger made a bunch of trips to Austin also. And any of the rest of you that, came to Austin, I please thank you very much for your effort and your time and your work. As a statesperson that I knew a long time ago said, you should never be truly disappointed. You take what you can get, and we certainly got improvement, and you come back and you fight again next time. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth for her to go through some new projects and programs that have been, and as far as I know, now will move forward. So with that, Elizabeth, let everybody know what's in the future for us.
Okay, so I provided some of the agenda material that will go to our meeting next week, and it kind of lays out the 6 new grant programs that were established by the legislature this session. I'm going to start with that, and then I'll go over what family practice got, which I think will be a good connector for the funding for FY14 for the next agenda item. And I am going to actually have Suzanne jump in as necessary. I'm going to go through each one and tell you how much money they got and kind of tell you where we are with the rules and what our plan is thus far. We're still actually getting some information from legislative staff about the intent of some of the bills that have been passed and still in that whole process. So, okay. So there were actually 2 sets or 2 bills that passed. One was HB 2550, which had remnants of SB 143, and HB 1025, which was the supplemental appropriations bill. Some of the programs were in both, and some of them were only in HB 2550. So first of all, so the planning grants were actually in both bills, and the intent of these is to have it's a competitive grant program that will provide one-time awards to assist in establishing new first-year GME residency programs awarded on a competitive basis. And this received about $1.8 million. And the intent is to only have these one time. And these programs can never have received any kind of Medicare funding, and that's what one of the eligibility criteria. And we're still working with some folks to try to figure out how we're going to identify the entities, hospitals, since we don't have a list of any hospitals that don't have GME. We only have lists of hospitals that do have GME. So we've been working with a couple of organizations to kind of figure out how to get the word out about that. The concern, particularly about this program, is the tight timeline. There were actually conflicting timelines in the two pieces of legislation. HB 1025 had that the submission deadline was November 15th and the award decision deadline was December 15th. And HB 2550 actually had a submission deadline of July 15th and an award decision deadline of August 15th. So we spoke with our legal counsel at length about all of these programs, and we're in the process of harmonizing these two bills. And at this time, it looks like we're going to be going with the November 15th date for the submission deadline and the December 15th for the award decision deadline. So the next two are the unfilled position grants and the program expansion grants, and both of those were actually in HB 1025 and HB 2550, and together there's roughly $7.3 million for both of those programs. The first one, the approved unfilled position program, is intended to fill currently approved but unfilled first-year residency positions in existing residency programs that support accredited GME programs. The other program is new positions or new programs created by existing GME. So the grants are to be for expanding the number of approved first-year residency positions or to establish new first-year residency positions. And the next one, the grants for additional residency years, that actually does not have an appropriation till fiscal year 2016. The intent is to fund residents who have completed at least 3 years of residency and whose residency program is in a field in which the state has less than 80% of the national average of physicians per 100,000 population, as determined by the coordinating board. So there's no money in that for that program. The resident physician expansion program was only in HB 2550, and upon clarification with legislative staff, has $5 million in it from SB 1. And the intent of this program is to provide to residency programs and encourage the creation of new GME positions through community collaboration and innovative funding. And the last program is the Primary Care Innovation Program, which received $2.1 million, and the grant awards are intended to be incentive payments to medical schools that administer innovative programs designed to increase the number of primary care physicians in the state. The funding for this program was actually established separately in SB 1 in a under Article 9, the contingency and other provisions, right, are 18.34. So those are the 6 new programs we got, and we're still kind of sifting through the differing languages between the two bills. And Suzanne has been working probably the most closely on these programs in meeting with legislative staff and with organizations to figure out what we need to do because of the tight timelines with several of them. Currently, we're in the process of composing emergency rules for the first 3 programs, the planning grants, the unfilled positions, and the new programs.
And also number 4.
The grants for additional residency years.
It won't be active yet, but we're going to go ahead and write rules.
Correct. So, and then the other 2, at this point, we're still trying to determine what we're going to need to do for those. There's not exact dates as far as when things need to happen with those 2 new programs. So we're focusing on the others at this point.
And for the primary care, we have a tentative date on our timeline of next spring, April of 2014, to start the negotiated rulemaking process. This is a new thing for the coordinating board that came out of our sunset bill, that we are now going to have to go through a negotiated rulemaking process that's established separately in the government code for certain categories of activities and rules that we do. And generally anything that's a trustee grant fund will come under that category. So it's going to be a much longer process than our normal rulemaking process. But the good thing about it is that we'll have the time to get a lot of stakeholder input. So it'll take us several months, we think, to go through that process, but we think we'll have a better outcome. But it does mean that we have to defer that, starting up that process a little bit.
Questions?
Yes, I'm Troy Fessinger. I had two questions. I'm a residency program faculty, and these two questions have come up. One is on the planning grants. If the program is in existence but the hospital is new, example would be my program partners with the rural hospital to set up a rural track. Can that rural hospital access the planning grant funds even though our program has been in existence for many decades?
I think they have to be able to pull down that GME fund, the Medicare funding.
That's the key.
Okay.
Component, and
we're
still. I don't want to speak out of turn for Suzanne, but I'm still trying to figure all of that out because of how Medicare funding. I'm not exactly clear how GME programs pull down that funding. Like, does the system hospital have a code that everything comes down from?
And it probably.
Ours is in Houston by Medicare billing numbers.
Yeah.
Right, and we're just not clear how those billing numbers are.
So we're making the emergency rules that we're working on now very broad, but we'll have to address that in detail in the request for applications.
Right.
So we don't have a definitive answer right now today, but we're
still learning about that.
Right.
So,
and the reason I ask is, even though I'm very happy with what we got, I would have liked more. And in talking to program directors, even that $65,000 resident salary and benefits is not enough to get a lot of people to put forth the capital without other sources. So they're looking for other sources. And one of the most cost-effective ways to increase slots would be to expand existing programs versus creating new
ones. Yes.
So there's a lot of devils in these details.
Right.
And I'll throw out the second question.
Learn that.
Even if you don't. And the second question that came up would be, in family medicine, we have geriatrics fellowships. There's considered to be a national shortage of geriatrics programs.
Right.
Would a geriatric fellowship position, which is generally a PGY 4 or 4 and 5, be something that could draw down these 4th and 5th year resident funds? I had a geriatrician ask me that question in Amarillo.
So for which program are you referring to now?
And I'm not lobbying for this program, but to give the example would be the Texas Tech Geriatric Fellowship Program in Amarillo.
Right, but I mean, which grant program
unfilled
are you
grant?
talking about?
The one for 4th and 5th year or more positions.
Are you, okay, the geriatric program, is it a first year residency
They
program?
have to do a family medicine. They have to do 3 years of family medicine, and then in the 4th year do the geriatrics program.
I think the answer is no.
It has to be additional years relating to a first year residency program.
Okay, like surgery, which is 5 years.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll pass that word on.
Okay.
That one we know, unfortunately.
Yes.
I think the concern, though, that Dr. Fessinger alluded to needs to be placed in the record. I think for the committee members, one of the issues that has significant concern to me is when you look at the total cost per year of a resident, and you look at this funding, you could actually set this entire new program up for failure because you're still asking the programs to find a large amount of other dollars in addition to what's available. And if they can't in any reasonable business way find those extra dollars, this money is going to go wasted because you can't make ends meet, with this sort of assistance compared to the total cost of operating a residency position. So you just keep that in mind. It wasn't originally designed this way. It just ended up this way because this was the amount of money that was left, so to speak.
Right.
So, be aware of, some of those concerns as people go forward, but because money to fill in the difference is becoming harder and harder to get. Maybe there'll be some changes in 2014 for the programs that will make that different, but at this point, it's still a concern that I and others have as they watch some of this legislation be created. It's still a positive, don't get me wrong, but just be aware of the nuances of what a program director has to face or a sponsoring person has to face. Another complicating issue is that hospitals aren't the only one that can receive Medicare funding for GME. There are foundation models on a case-by-case basis that can be granted funding also for direct GME, not necessarily indirect GME. So you have to at least consider whether or not you're going to include that or not, unless the statute itself specifically says hospitals.
No, it doesn't.
It says entities.
It says entities.
Other questions?
I don't know how locked and loaded the legislature is with this first-year residency, but Dr. Fiesinger's comments, if you can wordsmith it that the baby boomers becoming elderly, geriatrics care is necessary, so now you have a family medicine geriatrics PG 1 year. Again, and that may just be not possible, but I think there's ways to do it. Again, depending on what the real need is. If you're just thinking of primary first-year medicine, family, peds, et cetera, it's a whole different story. But based on needs, both geriatrics and even a rural residency, if the legislature is really looking for need, and the wordsmithing could be massaged, I think it's a very well-taken point that was made earlier.
That is a good point, but the stated purpose of HB 2550, and I believe of HB 1025 as well, is to increase the number of first-year residency positions. It's like the first thing in the statute. So we really have to work with that. Not to say there can't be some ways of interpreting it, but we're boxed in to a certain extent with that.
I completely understood, but unfortunately, in my experience now, most of the internal medicine residents are going either hospitalist medicine or into subspecialties, so you lose your whole PCP component of probably one of the largest residencies in the state.
I had a question about the planning grants because I'm not sure I can get my mind around it. The idea is to start new first-year residency programs in places that don't have residency programs, and it's given to entities that are able to eventually draw down federal dollars for it, and yet we don't have any awareness that federal dollars will be available. So they'd have to be eligible, but there's no Medicare promise of expanded.
Right, eligibility is the key.
So it's really a planning grant based on faith.
I can make a comment about that. There is a pathway for hospitals who have never received Medicare GME money to apply for and receive GME funding. But it has to be totally pristine hospital that has never received any GME funding whatsoever. And it is not, the formula that they receive funding for from CMS is not based on the historical formula. It's based on an averaging process, so it's not as much money. So that's partially the basis for the way this bill was structured. It does not assist existing programs with expansion. That's a different issue, though.
I actually pulled the legislation, and it says the board shall award one-time planning grants to entities located in this state that have never had a graduate medical education program and are eligible for Medicare funding of graduate medical education. So that's the criteria that we have to adhere to.
So our affiliate hospital has never had its own graduate medical education program, but we're affiliated with Texas Tech, who supplies it. Right. So if I literally try to wordsmith that, it seems like I could be eligible. I know the answer is going to probably be no. But again, just on what you read, I'm not sure pristine is exactly the right word either.
I believe the way CMS defines that is if your Medicare billing number has ever been associated with any submitted GME dollars, you're ineligible.
Right, and I don't know a way to, and I've tried to find some kind of list or something like that and have not had any luck. So poor Suzanne is going to get stuck with trying to figure out how we're going to determine that.
Well, just use the list of the GME hospitals, and then anybody else that applies, if they're on the list, they're out. If they're not, they're probably in.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to end up and see how the original rules are written, and then we'll have to comment on them if we so desire to. Claire, did you have a follow-up question? You had a perplexing look. So.
Thank you. I'm trying to imagine institutions which would design a new program. So they have to be ones who never did before, and that'd be ones that have some faith that there would be money again. And what I'm hearing around the discussion is it may be entities that are associated with other entities rather than true pristine ones.
Right.
So
I think part of our struggle is the timeline, because I think we're going to what we're trying to do is assess and write the rules as broadly or as close to the statute as possible, and then work the RFA with maybe some of these details. But part of it is we are not experts in how that all works or how to even verify that information. So I think we're still in the process of learning how we're going to figure all of that out, frankly. I mean,
absolutely.
So one more question then, Roland. You mentioned that foundations have received GME funding from Medicare. What about FQHC?
It's a case-by-case basis. I'm not aware of any in Texas who directly have received CMS Medicare funding, but I know it's allowable.
So all of these little details for all of these programs, I mean, this is just one instance. For all 6 of these new grant programs, these questions, issues are going to be coming up. And we've, like I said earlier, we're in the process of pulling different stakeholders in for various parts of that for that very reason, because I think we understand things to a certain extent, but program directors and organizations that have to deal with the fiscal component are much more savvy to kind of help us navigate the details.
And if I could just add, the reason I bring this up is, at least in the Houston area, Claire is painfully familiar with this. We have a hospital cutting support drastically. My system CEO has basically said, you're not getting any more money than what you're already getting. So any expansion we do would have to come solely from funds we can raise. Well, there aren't bags of money sitting around all the charitable foundations. So I think it's going to be a real barrier. And my concern is very much what Dr. Gertz said, is that there'll be this program, and a lot of people say it's enticing, but I don't want to start something and be on the hook if it goes away, or I can't raise the funds to fill the gap. And then the programs go unused, and then the legislature sees the money in 2 years and says, see, it failed. And I think there's real danger that that will occur.
So actually, we received a little bit of clarification. Suzanne and Stacy Silverman met with some legislators last week, and actually 2 of the programs, pardon me, I'm going to pull out my notes here. The programs for unfilled positions and the program expansion grants, one of them actually allowed for the funds to be used for 3 years, because we explained to them that residencies are 3 years and funding for 2 years concerns several programs, because they're afraid the funding will go away and then you'll have, a resident that's going to their 3rd year and they'll be out of luck. And so receiving clarification from them at this point, it looks like for those 2, the unfilled position grants and the program expansion grants, there would be funding to fund the resident for 3 years as opposed to the 2. Even though it's not explicit, the intent of the legislators is to do that.
And the clarification included the fact that the appropriation is to the coordinating board for 2 years. So the coordinating board has to either encumber or actually disperse those funds in 2 years, but we can make the length of award longer than 2 years if that seems more appropriate given the vagaries of the program. So we do have some flexibility there.
And I appreciate that because that's very salient. When I said 2 years to my director, he said, residencies are 3 years long.
Yes.
I'm
You can
well
go
aware
back
of that, and they have been
clarify
told.
with them.
You're going, I know that.
Well, and I think that,
But that's very important. Very important that they got that 3 years. And I appreciate your statement that the board understands that too and can try to put some flexibility in.
well, and we tried to have it included in all of the GME, that we explain. Most programs are 3 years. Funding for 2 years is really scary. I mean, to commit to the resident, you commit to them for 3 years, so we need to find a way to commit to the funding for 3 years as well.
I think, Elizabeth and Suzanne, I'd like to ask a couple of questions here. At this point, it's unclear, at least to me as chair, how our committee will be asked to be involved with any of these grant programs, if at all. Does the full coordinating board have a thought? I know they're going to meet very soon as to how they will administer these grant programs.
I think we're still trying to determine that. I think for the last couple of weeks, we've just been trying to figure out what are these,
and what does it mean
exactly, and trying to get some emergency rules passed. So because of the tight timeline of having to administer these programs, we have to have rules in place. I don't think that has been determined yet, and I think at the next meeting we will have a much better idea of what needs to happen.
I mentioned that for the committee members' purposes to think about, if indeed we are asked to be participants in some way, as opposed to the way not knowing, what our input would be or what our responsibilities would be until the full coordinating board decides.
Well, we'll just say, we don't have the specifics determined yet, as Elizabeth said, but our intent is to have a lot of stakeholder involvement in the planning of all of these 6 programs.
Any other committee member questions or comments? Audience, okay, your chance. Questions or comments? All right, well, going once. Dr. Foxall, in the sky, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, I guess so. As I understand it, the process is one of receiving comments from the various organizations that you've approached. Is there a plan to have a stakeholders meeting or any other way to get input as you're developing the rules?
Yes. That's all I know at the moment. There is a plan to have stakeholder input. We have not, we just haven't worked out the details of when and how to gather that input yet. But we're on a tight timeline, so we're going to have to move pretty quickly, at least on the first 3 grant programs. On the primary care innovation, we have a little more time to work that up, but we will definitely be doing something.
Well, it seems like just from the comments in the room that there may be some significant input that could be received from the various stakeholders that are impacted by the rules, and if there is some way to figure out how to make that happen in a timely fashion, it seems like it would be valuable.
Absolutely.
If there aren't any other questions or comments from the audience, or Lou, do you have another one, or is that it?
No, that's it. Thanks.
I think what I'd like to ask Elizabeth and Suzanne, what is the best way for interested parties to stay up on what's happening with this? I mean, is it website, coordinating board website, or how?
Well, I would say if people are interested that are watching, there's an agenda item for next week on our website. It's actually, let me pull it down. Agenda item 5R, which is kind of an update on the 6 programs. And this was actually drafted before we got some legislative clarification. And there's also a supplemental item on our website for the meeting next week, which kind of has a crosswalk that Suzanne, really put together, and I think is a great summary of all of the programs. It's got a breakdown of all 6 programs, and then it has the effective date, the appropriation amount, the source of the appropriation if rulemaking is required, and a really good breakdown, and then who would be eligible. So as of right now, that's the best source of information, and as time goes on, I think coordinating board staff is going to have to determine the best way to keep people up to date on the as these 6 programs get created and established and unfold with rulemaking and whatnot.
And anybody can contact me by email. That's perfectly fine, and I can let you know where we are in the process at that moment.
All right. Well, thank you both. It looks like you're going to have a busy few weeks here coming up. And I know that there are an awful lot of interested parties here and listening and hopefully viewing that will have keen interest as things evolve. What I'd like to do then is go to our most important part of business for the advisory committee, and as is our charge, we are to make a recommendation for funding for this coming year, and that would then go to the full coordinating board. The committee members received 3 options in their packet of information. I think you'll clearly see that the biggest difference is how you want to handle the public health and rural rotations. And with that, yes.
I'm just going to go over like a brief summary of what we got, and then you can go over the options.
That's fine. Elizabeth.
So I just wanted to start with, so the total appropriation received for the biennium was $12.7 million, and $5 million of that came from SB 1, and $7.7 million of that came from the supplemental appropriations bill from House Bill 1025. So the appropriation will provide roughly $6.3 million for each year of the biennium. So I'm going to let Dr. Gertz go through each of the options. I did want to point out one thing, which is along with the options, I also supplied the rider, which to some extent limits how much can be spent on the public health and rural rotations, which is $119,955 for each year of the biennium. So I'm going to let Dr. Gertz just go through each of those options.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think what I'd like to do is deal with the rider. The question might come up, well, why is that amount that amount? There was a directive in the past, I cannot for the life of me recall where it originally came from, that the percent of the overall funding would be roughly between 3 and 5% for the rotations. And this amount of money is actually a carryover from the amount of money that was in the rider 2 years ago. So that's essentially the basis for why $119,000. When you go to the 3 different options that are in your packet, and I will say, obviously, if you look at what the funding levels on a per resident amount were the previous 2 years, and particularly last year at $3,840, I mean, you're going to see essentially a doubling or more. Now, we should thank the legislature for their intent and understanding of the importance of the program that's in place. But as some of you who are new members, this is, I mean, funding previously at its high has been around $15,000 per resident per year. And the $3,840 was the lowest actually per resident amount that I can remember. So we're headed in the right direction in a very kind of chaotic time for graduate medical education, and we certainly thank the legislature for supporting the program in a stronger way than the last biennium afforded it. Option 1, if the committee members will go to, really the decision for us is how much and how to allocate up to the $119,000 for the rural and public health rotations. Some of you will probably ask, and those of you that have been on the committee know that the historical funding per resident slot for the rotations have been $3,000 per slot, and we lowered that in order to have more money to distribute to the per resident amount in the past. So one of them, and you'll also probably have in your mind, well, why 3? Well, for public health rotations, 3 has been about the amount or number that have been utilized by the programs in the past. So that's based on historical utilization of the slots, even when it was not capped. So that's an amount, a number that is pulled out of historical usage of that particular program and the numbers of rotations. On the rural rotation, it would be my feeling and thought that you could use as many as you wish to fund under the cap. And so what you're really going to see is that the options really have embedded within it 3,000 versus 2,500 for the public health rotation 3, and then simply when you decide as a committee how many of those to fund, the rest of the funding for the particular rotations are to get you up to as close to 119,000 as possible, and that's how the strategies of the 3 different funding levels were put together. I personally, as chair, don't really have a strong feeling for any of them because the amount that it changes the resident level is not too substantial. So with that, I'd like to just simply open it to Elizabeth if she has any other comments, or Suzanne, in relationship to the options. There could be lots of other options. You simply have to live under the cap for the rotations, and the rest would then be distributed in a per resident amount based on the rosters that we will then certify later on.
So the only comment I have is really, so the rural rotations used to be at 2,500, and that's option 1, and option 2. The last option has it at 2,000, which is what we're at now. So right now the programs get $1,500 and the residents get $500. So it's really up to you guys. I don't know if you all have a feeling one way or another. We were like more strapped last time, so we did 25 rural rotation residents at $2,000 each. So at this point, I don't know if the resident amount makes that much difference, if you all have strong feelings one way or another.
So my observation over the years is that the purpose of this is to enhance graduates of residency programs to consider working in rural areas, and that's consistent with the legislative mandate of this commission. And what I'm also observed is that certain residency programs require all of their residents to do a rural rotation, and the majority of residencies don't use these funds.
I think the last time I looked, it was about 6 or 7 programs that were using them consistently. And when there was funding, we had between 70 and 80 rural rotation residents going through the programs.
And that's fine. One of the questions I remember is that we know that the student rotations bear fruit in people ending up having rural careers.
Right.
Do we know about the residents who do these rural rotations and rural careers?
I would have to go back and look.
Does anyone?
I think we have posed that question before here, and I don't know that we ever got an answer. I think it was.
And I think I put some stuff together. I'll look through my material and see. I can't remember offhand, but I know I've pulled some stuff before.
Yeah,
go ahead. No.
That being the case, I think it makes sense to fund as many as you can to try and maximize your impact. And I don't know that a little bit less money per resident makes as much a difference.
Right.
I was going to say the exact opposite. I think that the money really is what entices the students, the residents, to go out. $500 is, I don't think, going to be sufficient. Having participated in this program when I was a resident, the $1,000, I can't even, it may have been more at the time, was definitely a draw to go out.
For a month.
For a month.
Is this money use it or lose it? 120,000, 119,955?
Yes.
Do we have to spend it one way or the other?
Yes, but we haven't had a problem spending it before.
And if it doesn't go to the rural rotation in public health, it would just go to the allocation for the family practice residency program.
Right. And we haven't typically had issues filling the rural rotation. It was really the public health that we struggled with. For some reason, and I'm not exactly sure why more residents aren't interested in the public health component.
Sorry, what is the public health rotation?
It's a month rotation. The residents in the past have received, I think the program receives 1,500. Dr. Gertz may know.
It was mirrored after the rural rotation. It was created.
It was created
based on
after.
a bill that Senator Nelson had passed a number of years back to have it congruent to the rural rotations.
Right.
It's my recollection that the distribution of funds were the same on both sides as we started, but then as time changed and money became less available, we changed it.
Right. And Cindy may.
That's my recollection too, Roland. We started out at like $3,000 plus some travel dollars.
Right.
It was the public health rotation was from the 75th legislature mandated that all family medicine residency programs must have the option for an elective rotation in public health, and it could not supplant or replace the required community health rotation. So it had to be, every program had to come up with a way to offer that. The Faculty Development Center did some studying to help write curricula, and the issue was it was such a broad difference of how people were going to meet that requirement. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
But
the premise behind the directive was that a lot of rural areas were having a hard time having appropriately background individuals for public health support in their areas, and this was an attempt to solve that.
And also I think it was 09 or 10, we did a study to look at the rural rotation. And one of the issues, which is always an issue, is tracking graduates. But we did show that there was a positive influence, and that the residents, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the percentages, but there was a certain percentage that were practicing rural health.
Well, and I think since I've been looking at the rural rotation evaluations since they've come in, they get to do a lot more.
Oh yeah.
In a rural setting, and so everyone that has ever gone, from what I've read, most of the residents that have gone have felt that it's a really rewarding experience because sometimes they get to do more.
Right.
In a rural setting than they would in their typical residency.
And you mentioned the funds have not gone unspent. What is the demand for the rural rotation funds versus the public health funds? From residents, not from communities.
So I looked back when we actually funded the public health, and we only had about 2 or 3 residents subscribe to the public health, and that's when there was no cap on how many people. I think we allocated for 10 or 15, and only 3 went through, as opposed to the rural rotations, which had up to 80.
And if those funds were unspent, were they then used for the rural residency?
Yes.
Rotations?
Yes.
Rather than trying to split the baby, would it be an option to just give each of the 26 programs $4,613.65 and use it for either or?
Some of the programs don't use it.
So what's
only 6 or 7 programs.
I understand, but then there'd have to be a way that they either use it or lose it, and it somehow comes back to, I don't know if it's us or the coordinating board or who it comes back to, and then the programs that would want to send somebody else or have another 2 or 3 residents, we start distributing back, or they fill out an application. I would use the money for this rotation, or I wouldn't, and then you just keep going backwards till you're down to the final fiscal year 14 that are actually going to use the dollars, and you use all 119,000 one way or the other, and maybe that way, 1, meet residents' interest needs, but 2, hopefully meet the needs of the state of Texas and our citizens.
I can help with that, and actually, because the way that was handled when there was more funding for the process, there was a point in time where every program had there was an allocation of rotation slots. They were held for every program to X point in time, and if a program did not request the allocation to that program by that time, then they were free to be redistributed among the other programs for those slots that were requested, and that's how that was handled in the past.
Was that successful?
It was successful in giving the other programs the option.
Is it worth reconsidering?
The only concern I have is the administrative part of doing that.
I understand. It's always the administration and the money. I've been there, done that.
Well, I think the reason that was stopped more than anything was that the number of slots funded, was reduced to such a level that, the administrative costs of it versus the amount of money funding it wasn't really reasonable. I mean, I'll just sort of rephrase. The committee can propose an option separate and different from the three that are here. Just to sort of summarize where we are, and then we can come back to questions and comments from the committee or the audience. If Dr. Schrantz's line of thought is used, you're going to increase the funding per position, per rotation. And if Dr. Hawkins' line of thought is followed, you want as many as possible, and then it would likely be with slightly reduced funding per slot. Not that they're exclusive of each other; it's just the number changes if you go one way or the other. So does any one of the committee members have a suggestion at this point as far as which model?
Roland, just one question.
Yeah, Lou.
Is when the funding was reduced in the last session, did we see any change in the number of participants? Did the amount of funding per participant seem to make any difference in the number who were applying or participating in the program?
I think there were fewer people applying, but part of that was because it was going to be based on a lottery system. So as many residents that wanted to could apply, with the understanding that only 25 were going to receive funding based upon a lottery system.
So that was because of the cap. So we didn't really learn if the reduced funding had any impact on participation. No. That was clouded. Okay.
So I'll formally move option 3.
Dr. Hawkins moves option 3. Is there a second for that?
I'll second.
Dr. Schrantz seconds it.
$500 is not much to me anymore.
It's not what it used to be.
It's been moved and seconded for option 3 for the funding model for this coming year. It's open for discussion now.
I was thinking a modification of option 2. 44 rural rotation slots at 2,500 and 3 public health at 2,500, which I sort of thought got to where you were going, Dr. Gertz.
I was trying to I'm not sure. I didn't mean to offer a direction.
No, you didn't.
Okay,
I put this together on my own.
Both ends. I think the chair would rule that if the committee wishes to consider a variation of the option, that we can either vote down the current motion that's on the table or offer an amendment to it along the line that you're suggesting, Dr. Becker.
If Claire Arnott Hawkins is amenable to that, I would offer that as an amendment if it's acceptable.
Yes.
Uh, 44 at 2,500 and 3 at 2,500 on option 2.
In principle, that reduces the number of rural rotations.
Is there a second for the proposed amendment? I don't think that those two can second it. If there's not a second, it'll die for lack of a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, all right.
Continue the discussion.
Now let's continue the discussion.
I mean, the discussion for me is really one of impact, and I think you've got a program that the more people you throw out into rural areas, the more likely they are to stick. And so I think the actual money doesn't drive this decision. The programs drive this decision. So what we've seen is the programs will make it happen, and a few interested individuals in other programs will make it happen, and the money will be used up, and the people will be in rural locations.
Okay, we're debating the amendment, which would be increasing the amount but lowering the number, keeping the public health rotation the same but lowering the rural rotation. Dr. Fessinger.
I have a question for Elizabeth and Suzanne. Do you have a sense of the demand for the rural rotation funding? We don't have a sense of what the magic price is.
No,
Do you have a sense of how many want it?
Like we mentioned earlier, there are some programs that have every resident go through. There are some programs that don't have any. There's typically probably between 7 and 10 that have at least one go through.
Okay, so what I'm trying to figure out is how many public health rotations do we need to fund? How many rural rotations do we need to fund? And the price is relevant because we went through this whole issue with the physician loan repayment program. As you well know, the $8,000 a year was chicken feed to most students. $165 made it much more attractive. And to me, it helps me to know the answers to those questions before I know how much to allocate to which. I don't know whether to say yes or no to the amendment or the original motion until I have a sense of what's the right number.
Embedded within the three proposals is the historical usage of the rural health rotation. There was no cap. Lou, are you okay up there?
Yeah.
we're hearing something coming over the speaker. I just didn't know if you wanted to try and say something or not.
Uh-oh, no, I was just sitting there like, be sure maybe my mute button on, sorry.
Okay. So we have a fair understanding of historical usage of the public health rotations. It's 3.
Okay.
We know that when we had more funding, that the number of rural rotations were as high as 80.
Right.
So that's all the real knowledge that we have.
And when it was at 80, it was at 2,500. That's all I know.
Okay.
That
helps.
Does that help? Okay.
Yes, that helps.
Okay, sorry.
So, I mean, that's kind of the data that we have, and then the rest is going to be, how we can guess it might evolve. Yeah. Just for the committee's purpose, we're debating the proposed amendment to the original motion, which would modify the number and the amount of funding. I don't see any other debate or discussion. The chair will ask us to vote on the amendment. Dr. Becker, would you please restate how you had phrased that?
Looking at option 2, rural rotation program would be 44 slots at $2,500. Public health rotation would be 3 slots at $2,500.
If there isn't any other discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hands. 2. All those opposed, raise your hand. It fails. All right, we're back to the original motion, which would be option 3. Any discussion about option 3?
Can I ask another background question? I'm into numbers, as you can tell. So looking at projected grant amounts per program and the estimated per resident allocation, remind me again what the current biennium number was.
We are doing 25 based upon a lottery system at $2,000.
Okay. And then for the residency funding, the formula funding?
It's about 38.
Because I'm trying to say impact on the programs.
3840
Okay, so they're currently $38.40 per year.
per resident.
Per resident per year.
Yes.
And that would go up to either $43.80 or $4,400 or.
No. The estimated per resident allocation under option 3 is $87.59.
Right. Sorry, I divided it into an annual number.
No, that is the annual number.
Okay.
Because we have to bring it back every year.
These are.
This is just for fiscal year 14, not for the biennium.
Okay. So if you could educate me again.
Okay.
I'm trying to basically compare current budget to what's going to start September 1. So if you could give me that comparison.
Okay.
To make sure I understand it.
So there are roughly 716 residents for fiscal year 13, and they received $3,840 per resident. And then there were 25 rural rotation residents at $2,000, and there were 0 public health rotations funded for 2013.
Okay.
The 3840 is both years, each year, per resident per year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the total funding was over $12 million for the biennium, and the darkened number on the right lower corner, shows you the expenditures for on the annual amount.
So is this number incorporating the new family medicine grant funding?
No.
That's in the new budget? Because
remember,
I had a totally different number when I've been doing the math on these budget numbers the last month of like $4,400 per resident per year. So this is double what my math was giving me.
It's probably because I don't know if you took into account HB 1025.
Okay.
Which was the supplemental appropriations, which gave us $7 million extra dollars.
Okay.
So the increase per resident would be $4,940 per year, and a 12-resident program of a 444 would be $59,280. So for 888 it'd be $120,000. For 12-12-12 it'd be $180,000. So 60, 120, 180, depending on how many residents you have per year.
Any other discussion or questions about the motion on the floor, which is to accept option number 3? I don't see any others. Lou, do you have any questions about option 3?
No, that was good. Thanks.
All right, the chair will call the question. All those in favor of this recommendation, please raise your hand.
Raising hand.
All those opposed, raise your hand. Option 3 passes. Thank you very much. That'll be the recommendation to the full coordinating board in a week and a day.
Yes, and I wanted to let you all know, program directors that are watching, I will be sending out an email either later today or tomorrow giving you another estimate for your operational grant amount. I know several were concerned because I just included the $3,900, which is what we used last time, because I wasn't sure what the committee was going to recommend. So you all have until next Friday to submit your operational grant applications, and I will send out a new estimate for you to use for your budget grids.
I want to thank the committee for diligent questions and thought in the process. And it is the most important thing that we do in recommendation to the full coordinating board with the funds, and it impacts an awful lot of individuals and programs. As you can see, 716 resident slots and also the rural and public health rotations. At this point, what I'd like to go to is item number 6, which is to discuss and consider future agenda items and meeting dates. In my earlier lead-off comments, I mentioned that I was really hoping that we'd have a lot more work to do, and we may or may not, depending on what the full coordinating board decides. But at this point, if things don't change, I personally, as chair, see no reason to change our 2-a-year meeting format. And the thoughts behind that are we have to meet sometime prior to the full coordinating board meeting this time of the year in order to make a recommendation for funding, which this one fulfills. And then the second meeting of the year, which we have typically done in February to coincide with other meetings that bring other residency program directors and others to the city, a meeting where we review the financial and written reports from the residency programs. Unless the committee feels that we need to meet more frequently than that, which we can, that would be what I would propose that we consider as far as maintaining that meeting schedule for us. And it does fulfill all the requirements of our duties to the full coordinating board.
So move.
Okay. Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Any discussion about that? All in favor say aye. Any opposed, say no. All right. Since February is a ways off, what I'd ask is Suzanne to sort of poll us when we get within a reasonable, distance of that as to when the meeting date will be, and if the committee agrees to meeting it to coinciding that meeting with the other meetings that are going on, then we'll continue that process also. Any other business that the committee wants to bring up before we sort of make some closing comments? Well, this is a quick meeting today. Any comments or questions from the audience? I see none. Lou, do you have any comments or questions?
Oh,
Well, Elizabeth, I want to thank you one more time for all your help and all your work, and good luck in your new endeavor.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you guys have done. Thank you so much again. And Dr. Gertz, thank you for everything that you have taught me. And this is the first committee that I've ever staffed by myself. So I really appreciate everything that everyone has taught me. And just thank you so much.
Good luck. We wish you the very, very best. And Suzanne, we welcome you and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
If you have not signed in before, please do so before you leave. We like to keep a record of who attends the meetings. And if there is no objection from the committee itself, we will essentially adjourn. Okay.
Thank you.
I see no objections. Committee stands adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank
Good luck.
you.
Safe travels home.